Alright guys, so something that I've mentioned before on this channel is that in the midst of Israel's war on the people of Gaza, they have in the background been significantly escalating and intensifying their illegal expansions of settlements in the occupied West Bank. And so we've talked about this somewhat before, but this was a great piece actually that was put together by CNN's Clarissa Ward, where she actually went to some of these illegal outposts and directly talked to people who are involved in the Israeli settler movement. And I think that this entire thing was pretty revealing for a number of different reasons that are going to make themselves pretty obvious and apparent here in a minute. But let's just go ahead and walk our way through this video, and then I'm going to show you guys a little bit more additional information in terms of how these Israeli settlements actually function, right? And what the West Bank is under Israeli occupation. So let's just jump into it here.
High in the hills of the occupied West Bank, a flag flies in the face of a Palestinian village. God is king, it says. 2 young settlers guard this illegal outpost. Construction hasn't even begun, but we are not welcome.
So they're asking us to leave. They don't want to talk to us. They said they've been here for about 9 months.
Dotted across the landscape, more signs of the fight to assert Israeli control over Palestinian land. The Arabic names on signposts crudely erased. Under international law, the Beit Hagla settlement is illegal, but last February, the Israeli government officially recognized it along with 8 others, a move the U.S. strongly opposed.
Okay. So, a couple of different things here already. Number one, when you see some of these guys who are walking around with guns like this, and then the other guy and the guys who are at the settlement outpost itself, those are not like necessarily Israeli security forces. In many instances, they're just far-right, deranged terrorists, right? They are Israeli settler terrorists who walk around with assault weapons and in many cases kill Palestinians or try to terrorize or intimidate or threaten Palestinians who are living in areas that they are trying to go and settle. So that's point number one. Point number two is that many of these settlers, even if they don't happen to be Israeli security forces directly, are actually backed up by Israeli security forces as they're going through this entire process. I've seen countless videos of them killing Palestinians with complete impunity. The Israeli security forces are watching the entire thing. They don't arrest them. They don't prosecute them. They don't throw them in jail for murder. Nothing like that. If anything, it's the opposite. It is an endorsement. They're there to be a backup for these Israeli settlers. You know, should any of these Palestinians get a little bit too uppity in trying to defend their land under what is completely an illegal land grab, okay, recognized by the international community under international law. Even you can make an argument that under Israeli law, many of these settlements are totally illegal, and yet they still happen with the full backing of the Israeli government. Now, the last part of what she said there, which is that the Joe Biden administration is vehemently against the expansion of these settlements, I mean, rhetorically, sure, he's come out against those. He has also imposed some mild sanctions on some specific settlers, right? But he's not actually using the leverage that he has in order to bring this to a stop, okay? And neither is the Israeli government, for that matter. If anything, especially under Benjamin Netanyahu and Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and his current far-right coalition, they are not just supporting these settlements, but encouraging them, okay? Giving an incentive for people to go and settle these lands, okay? So that's just a couple of different things here. We'll get into more details. I'm going to show you guys an article here in a bit that shows how they've basically just approved, as they were in the midst of visiting the United States, an Israeli delegation, they announced that they were doing basically the largest acceptance and expansion of some of these settlements in like 30 years or decades at least. So we'll get into all of that, but let's just continue with this video here.
The Israeli government officially recognized it along with 8 others, a move the U.S. strongly opposed. We're here because God promised us this land, Azrael Picard tells us. Now these settlers have set their sights on a new prize, one that seemed utterly impossible before October 7th. Returning to Gaza, they cheer. That is the goal of Zionist settler organization Nahalah, one of more than a dozen groups now advocating for the re-establishment of Israeli settlements in Gaza. A recent promotional video even boasts that Gaza will become the next Riviera. Daniela Weiss is the godmother of the movement, and she's already started recruiting from the 700,000-strong settler community of Israel.
We're just arriving now at a settlement in the occupied West Bank, and we're heading to a talk that Daniela Weiss is giving to a group of people who are potentially interested in resettling Gaza.
We are for the land of Israel and Ben-Gvir, she says. About 20...
I mean, pretty notable. She literally references Ben-Gvir, okay? So, I mean, Itamar Ben-Gvir, Minister of National Security, aggressively pro-expansion of these illegal settlements, pretty revealing that she mentions him by name. Now, another thing that was important is that a couple of minutes before this, she references how the Israeli government just approved these measures, even though, the Biden administration was against it, and even the Israeli government says openly that they discourage these kinds of settlements. This is how the process goes, right? You have a couple of settlers who go out and they establish some sort of an outpost that's near or directly in, some sort of a Palestinian village or whatever the case may be. And the Israeli government, again, openly, like outwardly, in many instances, this doesn't necessarily apply to Netanyahu's coalition, but normally they would be like, well, we're against that, right? We don't think that that's right. But then after time goes on, you have months and months and months that play out, and then eventually they come around and they say, okay, well, we're going to recognize this settlement, right? And so you get to the point now where she was just referencing there, this settlement community is like upwards of 700,000 Israelis right now that are living on stolen, objectively, under international law, regardless of any of your other feelings about this long-standing conflict or whatever, or the foundation of the state of Israel. They are living on stolen Palestinian land, okay? Land that was designated to be Palestinian land even after, like, 1967, for example. So it's 100% illegal, and yet you still have hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers who are living in the occupied West Bank. So what does that say in terms of the prospects for a future two-state solution or whatever, when you're going in to what is remaining of the Palestinian territories, where I guess hypothetically you could establish some sort of statehood, but you're fragmenting them into a bunch of different, essentially ghettos or Bantustans, right? And you're fragmenting them to a point where it's almost going to be impossible to have an actual two-state solution with the West Bank and Gaza and them being interconnected. You're fragmenting the West Bank, and that's not an accident. That is an intentional part of the strategy to make a two-state solution completely impossible. So I think that it's important to point that out. We'll get to some maps here in a bit, but let's keep going with this clip.
People gather in the living room of a family home. Weiss knows that for many in this community, there is deep nostalgia for Gush Katif, a block of 21 Israeli settlements that were forcibly evacuated by the IDF in 2005 when Israel left the Gaza Strip. This is the vision of Gaza, she says. You see all the nucleus groups. A map has already been drawn up, with 6 groups laying claim to different parts of the enclave.
So they've just been handing out these little booklets that say, people of Israel, return home, and then underneath, a call to return to the settlements of Gaza.
One of the organizers tells the group they have a representative flying to Florida to raise money. Nakhla gets support from a number of groups in the U.S., including AFSI, Americans for a Safe Israel, which co-sponsored a recent webinar on the return to Gush Katif, even as the Biden administration has cracked down on settlements in the West Bank.
There is a very strong support from very prominent, from very, I would say, wealthy people, wealthy Jews.
In the U.S.?
In the U.S.
Can you name any names?
No, I cannot. No.
Really? Why can't you name any names? Because if what you were doing was completely fine and legitimate and moral and good, why would you feel so hesitant? Why would you be so vehemently against revealing the names of the people from the United States of America who are helping to fund this? I mean, think about that, guys. You have Americans who are donating to organizations that are backing up what even the United States government says are illegal settlements, okay? So we're funding this directly, right? Now, on top of that, I'll just reference this real quick. This is something that took place over the last couple of weeks. I didn't get to make its own video about it, even though it kind of deserved it. But, I mean, we have here from The Guardian, hundreds of Palestine supporters protest Israeli real estate event at a New Jersey synagogue. So there were synagogues in the United States and in Canada, as far as I'm aware of, that were basically hosting, like, Jewish exclusive events where people could go to these synagogues and potentially purchase land that is on the occupied West Bank. Okay, stolen Palestinian land, and they were auctioning this off in the United States. So this is illegal not only under international law, but also domestic law, because you're establishing basically a racially or a religiously exclusive real estate event. You're saying we're only going to sell this stolen land to a specific subset, a demographic portion of the population. So it's illegal for so many different reasons, right? But that's the kind of shit that's going on in the United States and many other countries as well, is you have all of these organizations and wealthy individuals who are helping to back up these deranged settlers. So they continue here.
Back at her home in Kedumim settlement, Weiss tells us she's already enrolled 500 families.
I even have on my cell phone names of people who say, enlist me, enroll me, I want to join. I want to join the groups that are going to settle Gaza.
I have to ask you, though, because we're sitting here talking and we're listening to the
Yeah,
call
I'm
to
listening.
prayer,
I hope you are listening to it.
which is a reminder, I think, of the people who live here, but also the people who live in Gaza. What happens to them in this vision of this new settlement with Jewish settlers even in Gaza City?
What I think about Gaza, the Arabs of Gaza lost the right to be in Gaza on the 7th of October. Yes, I do hear the mosque, I do hear the prayer. Things were different until the 7th of October. No Arab, I'm speaking about more than 2 million Arabs. They will not stay there. We, Jews, will be in Gaza.
That sounds like ethnic cleansing.
Okay. The Arabs want to annihilate the state of Israel. So you can call them monsters, you can call them cleansing of Jews. We are not doing to them, they are doing to us. I couldn't make it clearer when I said that myself, as a person who is preoccupied with settling the land, until the 7th of October, I didn't have plans of returning to Gaza. It's clear, I'm not interested in cleansing.
Okay, so, I mean, think about the cognitive dissonance that goes into having that viewpoint. I don't know if she was just trying to gaslight Clarissa Ward, the interviewer here, or if she genuinely believes that, but she's actually trying to make the claim that she's the victim, right? That even though she is proposing going and setting up completely illegal settlements in Gaza, not just the West Bank, but in Gaza, after the Arab population is cleansed from there, she still thinks that she's the victim. She's talking about a settler colonial project that requires, as an inherent necessity, the ethnic cleansing of, in her own words, 2 million Palestinians who are living there right now. And she still is playing the victim. No, I'm not trying to ethnically cleanse them, even though that's literally what I'm proposing. And even Clarissa Ward couldn't let that slide. She says, that sounds like ethnic cleansing. No, it doesn't sound like it. It is that. It is literally that. By any stretch of the definition of what ethnic cleansing is. I mean, you're demographically deciding, religiously deciding, ethnically deciding to remove a certain population so that you can go in and replace them. That's ethnic cleansing, right? And so even Clarissa Ward wasn't buying that there and had to have some sort of pushback, but she still just admits it, right? And then pretends as if, no, it's because of October 7th that this is happening, right? Essentially because a couple thousand Hamas fighters went into southern Israel and in many instances did commit atrocities, that therefore that somehow justifies you blaming 2.whatever million Palestinians inside of Gaza and doing collective punishment on them, right? Because in her mind, under her racist ideology, every Palestinian is the same. Not just every Palestinian, but probably every single Arab is the same. Every single Muslim is the same. She's lumping those all together. You can tell by the rhetoric that she's using there, right? Referring to the mosque and referring to the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. So under her racist belief system, all Palestinians are the same. They are all equally guilty for whatever atrocities were committed by Hamas on October 7th, and so therefore Israel and these Jewish settlers have the right to go and commit an infinitely larger atrocity against them by ethnically cleansing them and resettling the land. So I mean, this is the kind of shit that they're openly admitting in Israel. This is why I find it so infuriating and baffling that we'll see U.S. Pundits and politicians having certain conversations in the mainstream media and in Congress and whatever, and they talk about Israel. Oh, it's this democracy. It's this beacon of human rights and international law and freedom and whatever. It's you just go listen to what Israeli media sounds like. Just go listen to the godmother of the Israeli settler movement. Go listen to Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and even Netanyahu himself, or Isaac Herzog for that matter. Okay, this is what is actually happening here. They openly admit it in Israeli media, in Israeli society, even when they're talking to a Western journalist, a CNN journalist. They'll still openly admit it. But somehow we're having like completely different conversations about Israel and what their goals are here in the United States. That is one of the most infuriating aspects of covering all of this, right? There's just this massive disconnect that's going on here. So this is a good piece. you know, shout out to Clarissa Ward. She also had another good piece recently where I believe that she was going and talking to some of the people who were blocking the aid from getting into Gaza, some of the civilians who have set up the bouncy castles and handing out popcorn and candy and whatever and throwing raves on the border of Gaza. So she also did another one where she was kind of exposing the, you know, deranged sentiments from many of those people. But, you know, good segment there. It's one of the rare instances where I just unequivocally will give, you know, credit to a mainstream journalist like that. But anyways, I want to move on here to another piece that just recently came out from the Washington Post, and we'll finish off with this. They say here that Israel announces largest West Bank land seizure since 1993 during Blinken visit. Okay, so here they say Israel's far-right finance minister Bezalel Smotrich announced a seizure of 10 square kilometers or 3.8 square miles of Palestinian territory in the West Bank on Friday. The move marks the single largest land seizure by the Israeli government since the 1993 Oslo Accords, according to Peace Now, a settlement watchdog group. So a couple of different things here. First off, this guy Bezalel Smotrich is essentially a settler himself. Not essentially, literally a settler himself. Okay, he comes from an illegal Israeli settlement. Okay, that's where his residence is, right? And so, you know, that's sort of his background, aggressively pro-expansion of the illegal settlements, you know, completely wants to ethnically cleanse what he calls Judea and Samaria, which is just another, you know, it's a biblical term for the West Bank. And so he firmly believes in this, the total ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from the West Bank and a land grab by the Israeli government. And so he's in this high position of power now where he's able to directly implement this, right? And so, I mean, think about that. The move marks the largest grab of land by the Israeli government since 1993, 3 decades ago, guys. I mean, Jesus Christ. They say, and this is also the same guy, by the way, you know, him and Itamar Ben-Gvir, some of the highest ranking members of Netanyahu's government coalition, they went to what I think was a video of this conference that was held in Israel where they were explicitly talking about resettling Gaza. So this is not some like fringe thing and, oh, it's just a couple of, you know, crazy settlers or whatever that want to resettle Gaza. It was also high-ranking members of the Netanyahu government. This is the finance minister. Ben-Gvir is the minister of national security. I mean, if you think that's irrelevant, I don't know what to tell you. But they got a quote here, again, referencing the biblical land of Judea and Samaria. It says, while there are those in Israel and the world who would seek to undermine our right over the Judea and Samaria area and the country in general, we are promoting settlement through hard work and in a strategic manner all over the country. Okay, so he's just openly admitting it. They say Israeli settlements in the West Bank are considered illegal under international law. Still, Israel has used land orders like the one issued on Friday to gain control over 16% of the Palestinian-controlled lands in the West Bank. The newly seized area includes parcels in the Jordan Valley and between the settlements of Ma'ale Adumim and Kaidar. So again, sorry if I'm butchering those names there, but one thing I do know about the Jordan Valley is apparently this is one of the most fertile areas within the occupied West Bank. Now they show this map here where this is significantly escalating obviously over the years. This is just tracking since 1993, so, you know, probably more before that, but, you know, we have this skyrocketing here just since October 7th. It's significantly escalated. They have been using the outrage, the cover, the focus on what's happening in Gaza, which is deserving, obviously, but using that as an opportunity to do this in the background when they think people may not be paying as much attention, right? And so they do say here, you know, this leads to them now having direct control with these settlements, over 16% of the Palestinian lands in the West Bank. If we're being honest about it, Israel, you know, effectively occupies at least the entirety of the West Bank. Now, they break it down into area, you know, A, B, and C, and area A is supposed to be under the authority of the Palestinian, you know, authority, and then, you know, area B is a sort of dual control, and then area C is primarily Israeli controlled and whatever, but Palestinians, regardless of whether it's the PA, which many Palestinians feel is complicit with Israel in their ongoing expansion of settlements, but regardless of how they define it on paper, Israel has the right to go and invade and do security raids and terrorize Palestinians in any area, whether it's A, B, or C, it doesn't matter. They do this all the time. I mean, famously, and we'll look at a map here in a minute, but, you know, Jenin up here, this is in a Jenin refugee camp, is where Shireen Abu Akleh, the Palestinian-American journalist, was killed a few years ago, was assassinated by Israeli security forces. Now, you'll notice, you look at the brown of where this location is, this is supposed to be Area A, which is supposedly under full Palestinian control. They're supposed to have control over the internal security there, and somehow the Israeli security forces were able to go into this area and assassinate one of the most well-respected and well-known Palestinian-American journalists, okay, in this area, right? So, again, effectively, they occupy the entirety of the West Bank. They just have different sort of segmented, parameters under which, their authority can take place, right? But they continue here. They say the announcement came as Secretary of State Anthony Blinken landed in Tel Aviv for talks with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about the future of the war in Gaza. Blinken's arrival followed meetings in Cairo with several Arab leaders and amid calls from Democratic senators for President Biden to establish, quote, a bold public framework for a two-state solution that recognizes a non-militarized Palestinian state. Jesus. So obviously, this is a double middle finger to Biden once again. You have your Secretary of State going over to meet with Netanyahu, and as he is there, they're announcing the largest in decades expansion of these illegal settlements. Just a double middle finger straight to the Biden administration, right? And then also, again, you have this irony here of like, well, the Biden administration, they say that they support a two-state solution. Again, how are you going to implement that? How are you going to implement that as they continue to expand these settlements, carving away and dividing and conquering Palestinians in the West Bank? How do you create a two-state solution without removing now hundreds of thousands of Israeli settlers who have taken over land illegally here, right? That you're doing essentially nothing about. And again, finishing off demanding, these Democrats are demanding a non-militarized Palestinian state. So what does that mean exactly? Seriously, what does that mean to have a state where under the rules of you having a state, you're not allowed to have any real security apparatus, you're not allowed to have control over your borders, you're not allowed to have a standing military? The way that U.S. politicians talk about a two-state solution, their definition of a Palestinian state is not what basically any other, in any other situation, a reasonable person would think a state is, okay? So they do these carve-outs, right? They also say Friday's land order is particularly problematic for the prospect of a two-state solution. Again, as I was saying, if Israel confiscates land around Jerusalem all the way to the Dead Sea, there will be no future for a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem, which is where it's supposed to be, right? They say this is where a Palestinian capital was supposed to be located according to the American and European talks. And they say the land transfer will also cut across the West Bank, dividing the North and the South, saying if the Israelis annex this area, it will be a catastrophe for Palestinians who live in the South, and Palestinian traders, especially in the South, will be cut off, and it will become impossible to have any independent Palestinian ways of life. And again, you get this map here where you see, what is supposed to be designated as Area A versus Area B, which is, again, administered by Palestinian Authority and Israeli security presences, and then you have, Area C under full Israeli control, and then this blue here, the dark blue, is Israeli settlements, right? And so you can see how they've sort of carved out, especially here around East Jerusalem, right? How many different Israeli settlements are within East Jerusalem, okay? And just carving it into a million pieces. And the settlements go all the way up here around every single part of the West Bank, right? In Area C. Now, again, they say in Area C this is full Israeli control, but again, what does it mean? If under Area B and Area A, the Israeli security forces can go and do raids and they can essentially operate however they want within those areas as well. So, there's a map just to put it in perspective there. And we'll finish off with a couple of these paragraphs. They say more than 40% of the West Bank is under the control of Israeli settlers. 40% of the West Bank. This is, prospectively where a Palestinian state would be recognized. 40% of it is controlled by Israeli settlers, according to B'Tselem. And more than 500,000 Jewish residents now live in the West Bank. Israel's government has also used incentive programs to move Jewish residents into West Bank settlements, where more than 200 settlements and unofficial outposts have fractured the Palestinian territory and displaced residents. In recent years, the housing ministry has offered subsidized apartments in the West Bank through a lottery system. So again, this is entirely backed up by the Israeli government. This isn't some rogue agents there that are going and setting up these settlements here, okay? It is backed up by the Israeli government. They say Palestinians have literal ability to stop the land transfers because after the 1967 war, Israel issued a military order that stopped the process of land registration across the West Bank. Now families lack the paperwork to prove that they have private ownership over their land, and tax records, the only other evidence of West Bank property rights, are not accepted by Israeli authorities. They say in June, the Knesset waived a long-standing legal precedent that required the Prime Minister and Defense Minister to sign off on new West Bank settlement construction at every phase. Smotrich now, the insane far-right settler and finance minister, now enjoys a near total control over construction planning and approvals in the West Bank, and approved a record number of settlements in 2023. And this process was playing out well before October 7th, right? So keep that in mind when people pretend as if history began on October 7th. Israel has been doing a slow-rolling ethnic cleansing of the West Bank for years and years and years now, right? And now you have one of the most insane members of Israeli society, Bezalel Smotrich, who basically just gets free reign, because this is how Netanyahu was able to come to power, by creating a coalition with motherfuckers like this, right? They say Israel has reached the conclusion that they could get away with this huge land grab because of the lack of international action, okay? And they also say there have been individual economic sanctions placed by the U.S. on violent settlers, but the greater violence of the occupation is the colossal land theft. And so that's what this really comes down to. You know, I mean, the Biden administration, they can come out and sanction individual settlers, but what does that mean? I mean, that's sort of trying to play off this idea that, you know, the expansion of these settlements is just about some individual bad apples. No, the entirety of it is illegal under international law. The entirety of the process of creating these settlements, which requires expelling Palestinians from their homes, isn't inherently violent. That is an inherently violent process, right? And I think that's an important point to focus in on sometimes, because people have this weird idea of violence, right? October 7th was the most abhorrent form of violence that you've ever witnessed in your entire life, but somehow what's happening in Gaza is not, because Israel's acting in self-defense. Or the decades-long, you know, apartheid and ethnic cleansing and occupation, none of that is violent somehow, because it's being done by a state. It's being done by a government that is a democracy, and they believe in freedom and human rights, and they're our close ally, and isn't all of that so wonderful? I mean, the reality of this is very clear. Okay, this is institutionalized, systematic violence that we're witnessing here. And it's dramatically escalated because many people are rightfully so, I think, focused on Gaza. But you can't ignore this, because the expansion of these settlements, right, this is a part of the day-to-day experience for Palestinians well before October 7th. History didn't start on October 7th. And so, you know, this is giving you an idea of the underlying aspects, the underlying forces that are at play whenever we're going to try to have a conversation about this so-called Israel-Palestine conflict, right? So obviously this would require the Biden administration stepping up, not only, you know, enforcing a ceasefire inside of Gaza and then holding Israeli politicians accountable for their genocidal actions there, although Biden would probably be accountable, or should be held accountable in that instance as well. But then you also have to, you know, sanction the entirety of the Israeli government if they continue to support these kinds of expansions of settlements. I mean, he did this while your Secretary of State was over there on a visit. I mean, Jesus Christ, how much more pathetic can your inaction possibly get at this point?